7.
Hello, everyone. This is Data Driven Chat, and today I'm very pleased to introduce Patrick Henz, who is an expert in compliance, which is a very serious subject. So Patrick has basically had a career in compliance since 2007, and he's an author of many books on this subject, and he is an author of one of my favorite books, Compliance as a Race Car. And I'm very happy to have him here with us today. So hello, Patrick.
Hello, thanks. A pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much for finding the time. So I think it's a traditional question for my podcasts, but essentially, can you tell us how you become interested in the ethics of AI and why did you decide to have a career in compliance?
Well, good question. Originally, I studied business administration at the University of Cologne in Germany. And one of my focus areas here had been social and business psychology. So also, you may say, behavioral science. And this is something which helped me a lot as I started in 2007 in compliance, because compliance is, despite its word, it's not only about complying with law and internal regulations, but also I have to understand the human psychology, because I not only want to identify the potential bad employees, but also to protect our employees of doing something bad. And this can easily happen because we all have a high level of stress in business. So it's quite a risk that you develop some kind of tunnel vision. And also, so I think it's a normal development after a while if you're thinking about human behavior, as you see that we're entering Industry 4.0, that you also think about the behavior of artificial intelligence, especially as AI is a tool. And so it's based on human values and ideas programmed directly into the codes. Even, of course, considering also the aspect of machine learning, as they may learn something what was not intended. How I started in compliance, I think it was being at the right time, at the right place. At the moment, I was working for the company's corporate information office, and they needed somebody to implement the compliance processes and controls in Mexico and Central America. As I was free from a project right at that moment, I became responsible for implementing compliance controls processes, which was a quite interesting experience, because this was in Siemens Mexico, and it was directly after the corporate scandals related corruption. So I spent, I think, like 3 months in a war room, always together with the colleagues from Pricewaterhouse until night. So a quite interesting experience. And also going back to AI, it's a little bit going home, because even my thesis at that time I wrote in the beginning of the 2000s about how the internet will change the consumer behavior. And I always liked science fiction. So for me, it was a quite interesting topic.
No, it's exciting. So yeah, I really like when people are taken to a career by some sort of practical project. So that's kind of what I try to always tell students, that you need to think of a problem, and then you can, while you're trying to find the solution, you can find your career, which is like really cool. I think the book Compliance as a Car And I think it's more than a book, more than just a book about compliance. It goes beyond compliance, and I think a lot of people think of compliance as something very boring because normally in companies the way compliance is implemented is just a set of very strict rules. So people do not think of it as something exciting. But in your book, you talk about it as something really, really exciting, a race car. So can you, for people who didn't read the book, and they should, I think, summarize basically your approach to compliance as a race car?
Yes, of course they should read the book, but let me explain. In fact, I wrote an earlier book, which was Business Philosophy According to Enzo Ferrari. And one of his famous quotes is, aerodynamics are for people who can't build engines. And in this book, I discussed this a little bit with the idea that the engine, let's say it's the heart of the company. It's about our values, and aerodynamics are processes and controls. So you may say you need processes and controls if your values are not strong enough. Important to know is that this is a real quote by Enzo Ferrari, but he later took it a little bit back, as he said that, of course, aerodynamics are important if all competitors have engines which are more or less the same strengths. And later I had the idea to split this up a little bit more, have it a little bit more detailed, and I thought to have it a little bit more practically focused directly on compliance. So I split it up further. As I said, the engine, especially in a sports and racing car, is of course the heart of the machine. So this is the most important, and I think the heart of every company are the values. Often you can directly relate this to the corporate founder. Nevertheless, other parts are important because, as I said earlier, even good people with strong values can develop something which is called ethical blindness. I think the term was defined by Guido Polasso, who's teaching this topic in Swiss University. So we have other important points are, of course, how fast I can stop the company if we have such cases of ethical blindness. So brakes are important. The relation between the crew at the pits and the car is important, which you can relate to compliance communication, rear mirrors to understand where are my competitors, the dashboard steering wheel, which is the monitoring of my controls. Of course, for me as a compliance officer, it's important to know where the company is going to, because I have to prepare them. For example, if I want to invest into artificial intelligence, and I have to know this to understand at least artificial intelligence on a basic level. So I need to be involved into the strategy, which you can relate to the car's headlights, for example. And very important, I, as a compliance officer, I am part of the machine. So the race car and the successful driver, they are nearly working as one. So I, as a compliance officer, I am most important, and honestly, compliance, and this is the good thing and the fun thing, it's not that strictly defined as finance, as quality, as HR, so you can really model the compliance position after your personal preferences. You can have the focus, let's say, on law, or you can have the focus on let's say on quality of the processes, or you can also have the focus I like to do this on the human employee. So you include behavioral science. You not do only the basic compliance trainings, but you try to prepare the employees for their risks. So you have tailor-made dialogues with the typical risk groups like sales, like procurement, but also you can do this for example, traveling employees to prepare them for the potential corruption risks in the different countries. This is very important because even if, let's say, countries as Mexico, Brazil, China, India, they have similar levels of corruption, if I see the transparency perception corruption index, but nevertheless, the type of corruption is completely different. So the best way to avoid this situation is to prepare them for the things that they could face while they are traveling.
So you touched on a very important issue, which is compliance needs to be in sync with business goals, right? So you first need to understand where the company is going, what they're doing, do they need automation, how much automation they need. So, but at the general level, why compliance and AI ethics is important for business, and why should businesses care in the first place?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a legal requirement. We have anti-corruption laws like the FCPA here in the US. We have the UK Bribery Act. Right. And here, very important is that these laws are extraterritorial. So meaning independent where I am in the world, if I have relations to the US or the UK, I have to comply with these laws. And the relation, more or less, it is up here to the governments how to, and their offices, how they define what is a relation and not. So it can be something very small that I don't have an office in the US, but the bribery, I used a bank relation which touched a US bank, and this is already enough for here the governmental office to start an investigation into my company. So first of all, we have this legal requirement. But let's say working and living 10 years in Mexico City, I know that corruption is no faceless crime. So it affects everybody from the lowest to the highest level in society. You see this in with public infrastructure, quality of public hospitals. You heard in the news that sometimes, well, not sometimes, but it happened that, for example, in Brazil, bridge crashed down. So we required medicine, drugs are missing. So we see that even people are dying because of corruption. So it is also an important factor to foster positive corporate culture, because as an employee, it is much more motivating to work in a clean company where your career, you are advancing based on your actions, what you have reached, and not based on the connections you have with your manager or other important people inside the company. And last but not least, of course, it's also a sales advantage, because as a company, I want that my vendor offers me the best quality for the best prices, and I want to be sure that they not try to bribe somebody inside my procurement department, because this would mean I don't get the best products for my money. And with this, I also remember I had the pleasure to travel alongside with some sales colleagues. We visited local distributors, integrators, and talked a little bit about them. And the good thing is, even in this case, Mexico is a country with a higher corruption index, but all our customers, they told us their stories why compliance and ethics is important, what they are doing. They're discussing it, for example, with their employees, or they also directly told me if I would start today winning a project with a bribe, corruption is like the mafia. So if they know I'm willing to pay, the next time they ask for higher sum, and this will continue on until I will lose all my business. So for me, it's very important that we have a strict zero tolerance for corruption.
And so it sounds like a lot like ransomware, right?
Yes.
When we're talking about cybersecurity. So yeah,
Exactly, very similar.
ransomware attacks, people essentially share information, and the criminals, they share information, and you're very likely to be a victim several times in a row, probably from the same group or from related groups. I just wanted to pick a little bit on what you said and kind of go a little bit deeper into corporate culture. So yeah, I appreciate that there is a legal requirement and there is a law, but also we have, I think, important compliance issues around corporate culture when we do not have laws. So, for example, in Europe and in the UK, we have European law about privacy, so GDPR. Which regulates personal data and privacy. In other countries, we do not have these laws. There are some. I know that in California there is a law that is very similar, but we have a lot of originality, right? And yet there are important, I think, issues that compliance officers in various countries are looking after that are not really regulated by the law. So it's a corporate culture, it's who we are. Can we go a little bit deeper? What are your thoughts on these issues that are not really, when you don't have a legal requirement, but you have some sort of business need for a policy, a compliance policy?
Yes. We have this topic, for example, in global companies, and here normally you would do that you use this most strict law. So that's in a global company. I think it would make sense to use GDPR requirements in all your locations, independent if you are in Europe or in the US, South America, Latin America, or Africa, Asia, whatever. So here I would suggest that we use the most strict law from any entity, any location. Mm-hmm. If you are a local company in a country where, let's say, GDPR or any other topic is not required by law or not fostered by law, as a company, you are always free to implement internal guideline which is more strict than the law. Mm-hmm. And let's say for GDPR, this is, I think, especially relevant because data privacy, Microsoft communicates it that it's a human right. Okay. So they want to respect GDPR or a similar level of data privacy, independent if they are, let's say, in China or in the US or in Europe. And I think GDPR or data privacy, it's also a sign of respect from the employer to its employees if they're not spy on them. And this is a topic which right at the moment, as you may have seen, is discussed as some employers want to use some software to see what are their people in home office doing, if they're really working as they should, or how much time they use on social media, whatever. So, and here I think compliance can support because due to transparency and fairness in the corporate culture, we can establish a corporate culture of trust, where on the one hand, the employer not tries to spy on you, at least if there's no suspicion that you are opening non-adequate websites, that you spend 5 hours a day on Facebook or whatever. And if the employee perceives that you get respected, they understand themselves as a person which should be respected, and they act in a respectful manner also towards the employer. So something which is described as the Pygmalion effect. So if I treat people with respect, they treat me back with respect. And I think here behavioral science and compliance can support.
Yeah, so these are awesome examples. I remember I recently saw basically a kind of like a product advertisement, and me and my team we called it one of the AI bollocks du jour, when it's basically was a surveillance system inside the company where employer even calculated the time people spent in the toilet. So that's just, it's just beyond me. Like, why would you want to do that? It just doesn't make any sense. I think it's important to measure productivity, maybe other things, but not toilet time. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, maybe it measures the quality of your company food or whatever.
So can you tell me, if you had to pick one project or maybe one achievement in your career that you're most proud of, what would it be?
Not an easy question. I think in general
it's hard to pick one.
I think what I reached in the different positions where I worked, different companies, is to establish compliance as a trusted advisor and being respected. As I've mentioned before, compliance has to be the expert on compliance and legal topic. But on the other hand, I have to have a basic understanding of the business, how the company is earning the money, what are the compliance risks, what are the company's risks and opportunities beside compliance, and also employees have to perceive me as a trusted colleague, because if they not trust me as a person, if they not think that I have a basic understanding of their problems besides compliance, they will not ask me if they have if they have a compliance question. And on the other hand, I think it's not enough being just the trusted advisor, but also see compliance as an enabler, because as a compliance officer, I am responsible for processes and guidelines. So I'm also responsible. And I think this is, again, a sign of respect, that my processes are as strict as needed based on the risks, but on the other hand, not more bureaucratic, to not cause any non-necessary bureaucratic burden. And I think being perceived as a trusted advisor and, let's say, enabler of topics, I think I'm proud of. So it's a little bit changed from the push that I try to push the compliance message into the workforce, but having a pull, I explain why compliance is important, not only for the company, but also for their personal development, and for the best of the companies, the best of their families.
Yeah, so I think it's these are obviously very important issues, to be to have a kind of the level of authority in the company, and really have relationships like in this and leadership, so people actually see you as a leader. So yeah, I think these are extremely important things, and glad that you kind of showcase this expertise and this leadership skills that allow you to do this very important work that you're doing. So tell us, what are you currently working on? What keeps you awake at night? So I know that there are things you cannot tell us about, but maybe there's something you can share. Maybe you could share some of your research projects or something that is not, that's something that could be in the public domain.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a big surprise as as I said in the beginning, Industry 4.0 digitalization is entering all companies and it affects all positions. So I'm seeing how I can use this for compliance. For example, you have continuous monitoring on vendors, payments. You can have something like a compliance chatbot for answering first questions, but also to understand where are risks with a more digital portfolio. And this, I mean, if I have algorithm, somebody has to ensure that the artificial intelligence complies with the same values than our employees. So, and I see one risk is if we have more, if you're working with more algorithms, with more tools, that employees tend to overtrust what the algorithm is suggesting. So most relevant for me is that employees keep up their human ability of critical thinking. So I'm thinking how to address this, for example, in internal workshops, how I can do this in in-person training, but also how I can do this in online training, which I, for example, I saw yesterday, which could be also using trainings in a virtual academy where we are all participating in a virtual meeting room, having our avatars, which sounds a little bit like a gameplay, but I had a very good description of such a tool yesterday. So there are also very several practical reasons why I would like to use such a tools, as it empowers the participants. But on the other hand, if I speaking before avatars, in opposite, just seeing my PowerPoint presentation on my screens, I get a little bit more feedback. I see if the avatars are really moving to the points I'm showing, or if they're just like frozen, which may indicate that the employee, for example, is connected, but working on his other screen and not really listening to my presentation. So there are a lot of great new challenges for compliance out there.
We cannot avoid the topic of COVID, and many people now are forced to work from home. So, and under these circumstances, I think that puts an additional strain on compliance, right? What challenges do you face at the moment with regard to the fact that people are at home? And what role do you think AI ethics and compliance will play in helping to resolve the current crisis?
Well, I mean, you said current. I would understand that COVID-19 is working as an accelerator of the development which we already saw, meaning working, for example, home office. It was already a tendency that, for example, in my position, I'm responsible for various locations. So it's not really that imperative that I'm working from the office, but theoretically, I mean, I'm working on my laptop. So most people, they don't really know where I am. So if I'm answering my emails or do approvals inside tools, it's not really important if I'm where I'm sitting. And let's say still last year, a lot of companies have been skeptical if work from home really works, if the employees are efficient working, or also if the virtual private network will work with all that traffic. And now they are forced, as everybody is, or nearly everybody who is working from home. And after, I mean, we are here already doing this for 2 weeks, and we assume there will several weeks to follow. Means a lot of employees get used to it. They may have rearranged their departments, houses, have their home office, maybe even invested into a second monitor and better chair or whatever. So maybe companies will discover the employees they are showing the same level of work than they do at the office, or maybe they are more efficient working from home than at the office. And then the question is why we want to have them all in the office, as of course office space is also a cost factor. So we don't know. So and here compliance, coming back to your question, as I've mentioned earlier, compliance is an enabler to foster a culture of trust. And one of the problems why employers not want to have that much home office is that they perceive a loss of control, as they cannot see my employees coming at 8 a.m., leaving at 5 p.m., but they really have to trust them that they're really working. And I think in a culture of trust, where employees really complying with their requirements of work, this can work, because at the end, what is today more important are the results. And here it really doesn't matter if I'm sitting, let's say, 7 hours before the computer or 9 hours for the computer, if I'm doing 1 hour break or if I'm doing 2 hour breaks, if I get my children from school, going to the yoga class at midday or whatever.
Mm-hmm. A very positive perspective then. So like you see the COVID as a potential accelerator. Actually, also, I completely agree with this opinion. I also think that COVID will accelerate a lot of things that we've been talking about. Unfortunately, I think we ran out of time because we were kind of thinking about them, planning them, but not much actual work was going on. So now we're all forced to do it quickly. But it's great that compliance officers are also thinking about these things. I think it's great. Looking into the future, so hopefully we will all go back to normal, or there will be some sort of arrangement where it will be more work from home work in the future. But just looking at the future of compliance and application to business, how do you think it will develop in the next 5 years? So what's your prognosis? I appreciate that this is going to be speculative, but if you had to make a prediction now, what would you say?
Yes, compliance it will not develop different than other job functions, meaning thanks to artificial intelligence or also robotic process automation, these tools will take away a workload from me, and especially repeating work. So not the most fun part of my work anyway. So for me, it would be quite positive. So theoretically, with having more time, the question is what compliance will do to this time. It can be that we get more responsibility in the development, for example, for AI, if this exists in the company, that we understand the risks and opportunity and to work together maybe with development. Also, we see the tendency that compliance goes more together with ethics. So we're not only focusing what is allowed and what not, but also think about ethics, which may include also sustainability, or also to have another approach, which is GRC, meaning a holistic understanding of risk, governance, and compliance. And this not only as adding the three functions into one, but also understand the interaction as a change in the governance, meaning in the company's tools and regulations will, of course, also affect the compliance function, as people may get motivated or demotivated to comply with regulations. And this is, I think, a very interesting development, especially going back to Industry 4.0, which I think will foster system thinking. And this you may align with the philosophy of W. Edwards Deming, which understand a company as one system. So a change in one part automatically changes the outcome in other parts of the company. So in opposite, maybe to 10, 15 years ago, where compliance was seen as something as a separate functions, compliance may integrate it a little bit more in the company, and this could be done via this GRC approach, ethics and compliance, sustainability and compliance, or audit and compliance, or something like this. I mean, there's no one fits all approach, but it depends on the individual company's structure, what would be a good fit and a good development for compliance.
So you think there will be more customization and kind of personalization in terms of compliance applications in business, right, in the next 5 years? So yeah, that's great. This so Norma, this is a very traditional question for me. So at the end of the interview, I always ask this question. Can you, if you had to recommend one book and one film, and you can only recommend one of each, you cannot have like a list, what would these recommendations be?
Okay, good question. I thought to have the same answer for book and film, and then align this with and then align this and align this with another book, and then I explain why. So, as you know, I'm a fan of Philip K. Dick. So, as a book, I would do a classic recommendation: do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, back from 1968, which I assume is the book which is has been based for Blade Runner from 1982. Mm-hmm. Of course, if you're speaking about AI and ethics, this is some very interesting ideas. And also, I like to mention here that Dick wrote this book not that much to predict the future, but to think about the Second World War, and especially the dehumanization done by the Nazi regime, where they treated and triggered that big parts of the population not saw Jews as humans, but as something else, and this was this dehumanization could lead to the killing of millions of people. So, and this is what Philip K. Dick wanted to present in his book, and which also was investigated by many social scientists later, as a lot of them immigrated also from Germany to the US, to understand how humans are capable to dehumanize and treat others like objects or something like this. And I think the topic lost its relevance. I see that parts of societies are shifting away. We see a rise of population. So I think the book is still very relevant, and it's quite different than the movie. So even if you know the movie, I would recommend to the people listening also to take a look at the book or listen to it as it's also in Spotify, for example. So I think this is very relevant for all of us who work in the sectors of ethics, especially now with artificial intelligence. And if you're working in this area in a company, I think I mentioned it earlier, algorithms are a tool, so they should be based on the company's values. And the company's values, if you investigate a little bit, and if you're working, let's say, in a bigger company or a company which exists, let's say, for more than 100 years, a lot of today's regulations, corporate values, you can directly relate it to the company's founder. So it is always, and this would be a general recommendation, interesting to read a biography, if possible, the biography of the company's founder. As mentioned in the beginning, I wrote a book, Business Philosophy, based on Enzo Ferrari. So, and this is especially interesting as there are a lot of biographies around. So, for example, I read the book Enzo Ferrari by Luca Dal Monte, which is a very big one. It has, let me shortly check, a little bit more than 900 pages, but really easy to read and very interesting. Mm-hmm. So maybe not especially reading that book, let's say, but I would recommend also to read a little bit about leaders like who worked like 100 years ago, because at the end their skills, their values, they are not that different to our today's business leaders.
Exactly, and probably they faced unknown risks, right? And they found solutions in very dynamic environments. So thank you so much for these recommendations. Thank you, Patrick, for finding the time to talk to me today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.